Awesome. Okay, do you want me to switch? Or just let me know when you want me to switch slides.
Perfect. Am I good to go?
Yeah, you're good to go. Good to go. And
Okay.
there's some people you can't really see. It's a little bit smaller, but there's some other people that you can't see in the video also.
Okay, no problem. All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm Manuela, and I'm super excited to talk about, honestly, my two favorite topics, product and lightning. If you go to the next slide, the one thing that I wanted to share at first is just like a deep, deep thank you. And not a thank you for having me, but a thank you for having this club. I think, especially as an alum, you look back at the things that your college does and you're like, not proud of that, not so proud of that. But when I saw this, when I was scrolling my Twitter feed, I wish I could have recorded my face. I was just like, damn, that's something I'm very, very proud of. So yeah, just thank you for your conviction and excitement about Bitcoin. Thank you for your excitement about new technologies generally and being open-minded and curious. Thank you for taking action, because I think action is the hardest part, obviously, and just having this club, attending the meetings, even if you're not fully orange-pilled yet, just being eager to learn more about it is a huge step forward. So a big thank you for me on that. And then definitely thank you for having me. I think hopefully I'll learn a lot from you all today and you'll learn a little bit from me. That's the goal.
No, thanks. But we're so grateful for you for coming and for coming back. Maybe one day we can have you back in person also.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Haven't been
But
to Atlanta in a while.
I know. So we're in Gates right now. So for some
Okay,
context of where we are.
nice. I was the first year that Gates
That was there.
came alive and had classrooms.
Oh, cool.
So a lot of trauma in Gates, but a lot of cool things in Gates too. So for today's agenda, I figured we'd keep it super simple. I really want to save a lot of time for Q&A because I think that's going to be the most beneficial part to everybody. But the way I wanted to structure it is first an intro on who I am. So me, BC, before Cornell, me at Cornell, in case that's interesting, post Cornell, and then the present. Then I wanted to talk more about Strike and what we do with Lightning and just how it relates back to Bitcoin, which is why we're all here. And then finally, that Q&A section where I want to spend hopefully the majority of the time.
Sounds good.
All right. So me, BC, before Cornell, I was born in Colombia. I moved to the United States when I was 5. And like a lot of Colombians, I moved to South Florida. So I grew up in Weston, Florida. My nuclear family is still there. My sister lives in Miami, typical Miami life. And so I am bilingual. Spanish is my first language. And you can imagine that if you're from Colombia and then Florida and you go to Cornell, it is quite the culture shock and quite the weather shock. It's kind of funny also to me to have two geographies on this slide and then the App Store. It's like, what's going on here? For me, when I consider myself before Cornell, something that was very important to my identity was when the iPhone came out. The iPhone coming out was probably the biggest game changer in my life, even if I didn't know it then, because it opened my eyes to what app development even was and really what software was. Because at the time, the things that I was doing on the internet were like addictinggames.com or like YouTube, but there wasn't the sense of like I could build something and very easily I could get it in the hands of people around the world. And when the iPhone came out and really when they opened the App Store to developers, that's when I became like kind of addicted to the whole concept. I was making a bunch of apps, 99% of them really bad ones. I was jailbreaking people's phones. I was just very excited about this new technology. And so going into Cornell, I was like, well, really the only thing that I know and love is building apps. So like, what is the major that aligns to that? So the next slide, that brings us to Cornell. I started in computer science because again, all I knew was building apps. And then very quickly, I think because of just the rigorous math part of the computer science major, I was like, wait a second, this is not the building apps major. This is like the theoretical, like very complicated stuff major. And it really wasn't what I liked. But at the time, college students didn't really know about product management. We didn't really know about user research. And even the information science major as it is now was very, very new. And so it really took me joining, I think it was the HCI course by Francois, if he's still there. I took that course and I was open to the other world of computer science. It was like, to me, the more creative side, to me, the side where you're learning about a customer's like psychology, really. What is the user experience like, thinking about design and so on. And so that's when I shifted over to information science. And then I graduated in December 2015. I couldn't make it another winter in Ithaca, if I'm being honest. So it was a semester early. At Cornell, I spend a lot of my time I was the president of AFI, so that is me getting crushed by one of the yearly pictures. I was the first member of CU App Dev. So my friend Eric, who's in that bottom middle picture, he started talking to me about this notion of, you build apps, I build apps. Do you think there's anybody else on this campus that builds apps? Which is kind of funny to think about now. And I remember being like, I don't know, but it's so cool. And it'd be awesome to be able to talk to other people about this. Because in discrete math, we weren't talking about building apps. And in 2110, we weren't talking about building apps. And so we were just kind of like, there's got to be more people who are interested in this type of thing. This CU App Dev Club is what it turned into. I encouraged it. I was like, dude, please do it. It's a great idea. And that is now the CU App Dev that you know today, which to me is crazy that it still exists. And that Eatery, which is the first app that we built, is still very much alive. It is very, very cool. And then he ended up being Robinhood's first iOS engineer, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, so sorority life, a very different version of me back then. CU App Dev was a very big thing. And then a lot of my internships ended up kind of accidentally being in product management, because a VP of engineering who did one of my iOS internship interviews, halfway through the interview stopped me and was like, hey, I know you want to be an iOS engineer, but you really should be in product. And at the time, I had no idea what he was talking about. I was like, project management? I don't want to manage deadlines. And he's like, no, product. You can talk to our VP of product and he can teach you more about the role. And that conversation ended up totally changing my trajectory for both internships and then after Cornell. And then the top right picture I think is hilarious. John Kleinberg. I think he's still a professor at
Yeah, I had him last year.
Okay, so he's a legend. He's a computer science legend. And this picture is one of the most embarrassing pictures I've ever taken. I like left him hanging on a handshake during graduation. So don't do that, but that picture makes me laugh a ton. So that was my time at Cornell. And again, I can talk a lot more about it in the Q&A.
Yeah. And real quick, did you say Eatery? That's the first app that you all made?
Eatery was the first app and it was super successful. The second app that we ever made is the one that I have a screenshot of on this slide. It was called Ice Fishing. And the reason why we had that name was because the whole concept of the app was for people to upload their daily song with the hopes of you learning about a new cool artist or a new genre. And in that process, when we were ideating what could we build, ice fishing was apparently a like low-key popular genre on Spotify. So we built this app, massive failure. I don't think it ever got beyond this semester, but it was a cool concept that it was when Snapchat had just come out with stories. So it was kind of like your music story. Eatery was way more successful.
Yeah, I used it every day last year. So it's still going.
Amazing. That's awesome. Cool. So post-college, again, my internships were all in product, which at the time was fairly rare. These days, I think it's more normal, which is really, really cool. And I applaud the companies that take bets on interns for a product role, because no one works harder than someone who's currently in college, especially if you're at Cornell and you just have a pretty wild coursework. You have just very difficult things that you're solving on a day-to-day basis. An internship is almost like easy compared to the stuff that you do at school, and you're just more hungry. And so I think the startups that take bets on people who are still in college, those are the best startups. So all to say, my internships were in product. So then when I graduated, I went full-time to product management. I moved to DC out of college, which is very strange if you know me. My whole dream was always to be in San Francisco and so on. But long story short, I don't have a good reason other than I followed my ex, which is a very not me thing to do, but I did it back then. Well, it was someone who was obviously at the time not my ex. Moved to DC. I was like, well, if I'm going to be here, I want to be at the coolest startup. So at the time, it was a company called Fiscal Note. It is now a public company, but I was the second product manager there. And I ended up loving DC. Turns out it's an incredible city for people in their 20s, because you're either still in school or you're in grad school, since there's so many universities there, or you're like a new grad working at Capital One or something. And so a lot of people are young, they're looking for friends, it's super social. So DC ended up being a great time. The startup was also a really good time because it was only 70 people, and as a second PM, I had a lot of autonomy, probably too much autonomy. I was taking meetings with like the John Deere C-suite, the McDonald's C-suite, and I was like a 20-year-old in a suit, basically, which was very, very weird, but very funny. And so I got to learn a lot about product on the B2B side, which I had no experience with. Learn how to work with sales teams, learn how to work with enterprise engineers and things like that. And so it was a very unique experience. But I never really wanted to be in DC. In fact, 3 weeks into moving, I broke up with that person who's now my ex. And so kind of learned that the hard way. And so the way that this collapses with Bitcoin is that it happened to be around the 2017 bull run. And I was working this startup job, but I was obsessed with Bitcoin. I was like, what is this magical thing that everyone is talking about? And at the time, I had been using Robinhood to do stock trading. And I remember thinking like something this easy has to become very popular for Bitcoin. And that's exactly what happened. Coinbase hit like the deep, deep mainstream. It was like the #1 app store for a couple of weeks that year. And me and all of my like startup colleagues, all we were talking about was Bitcoin, 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 Bitcoin. And so now I'm thinking, okay, I don't have a reason to be tethered to DC anymore. I love this like Bitcoin thing that not a lot of people know about. What can I do with this? And so I thought, well, again, I've been using Robinhood. Robinhood already kind of nails the trading UI at the time. They nail the user experience. That means they're gonna get into Bitcoin if this thing continues to do well. And I want to be there before they do. So I hit up my friend Eric, the CU App Dev founder, and I was like, hey, I think I'm ready to move to California. And he was like, amazing, great timing. Robinhood is hiring product managers. He connected me, and within a couple of weeks, I moved to San Francisco. So I joined Robinhood. I was in the first 100 employees and then was there through the IPO when we were 3,500 employees. And I left in December of 2021. So there I was a product manager, then I was a manager of product managers, and I got to grow products from just a few users to 25 million users. Wow. It was really, really incredible, rewarding, and deeply tough time, but it's awesome. So that was post-college. Yes. And then the present, now I am the VP of product at Strike. And again, that's how it all comes back to Bitcoin. So when Robinhood, and you can go to the next slide, when Robinhood had IPO'd, what happens there is a company has to become a lot more rigorous. You have to really have tons of processes because you really don't want to mess things up when you have shareholders and when people are looking at your quarterly financials and all of that. And that's great. That means that the company is doing an amazing job. But as an employee, it's a weird feeling. You go from this like really scrappy thing to suddenly like structure and hierarchy and whatever. And a lot of people love that. You kind of just like grow your career and it's great. I felt kind of trapped. It's like, I love this company. I love the mission, but I want to do more. I can have more impact. So in December of 2021, as I mentioned, I was going to leave Robinhood to be a founder. In my eyes, there was nothing with more autonomy and scope than being a founder. And I was set on starting a fintech company. And I was set until I met with Jack Mallers, the CEO of Strike. He happened to be in San Francisco, and we did like it sounds so lame, but it's true, like a chat around a fireplace for like 3-4 hours. And at the end of those hours, I said like, man, I can't start a company knowing that you're working on this. I have to work on this thing with you. And it all goes back to the DC days. I had so much conviction and interest in Bitcoin. Then you saw a bunch of noise come into the market. And I have to admit, Robinhood was part of that. We added Dogecoin. There were a bunch of hot dog coins, like just weird things. And you kind of like lost the narrative of what Bitcoin was even here for. And so when I talked to Jack and he was just dead set on it's Bitcoin or bust, Bitcoin is not crypto and so on, I was sold. That was the level of focus that I was really looking for in a company and a founder and so on. And so I ended up joining Strike that same month, December 2021. So it's been a little over 2 years. And at Strike, I am responsible for product. And product means product management, design, content, and marketing. So really like the creative functions of Strike that work very closely with engineering, legal, compliance, et cetera. That is all my domain. So it's been an incredible time. This screenshot is the old Strike logo from when they introduced me to the team, and the very old UI that now looks totally different. But it's been just incredible being on the journey of what Strike is.
Mhm.
So on that next slide, so what is Strike? Strike started as a Lightning wallet. And the reason why is because at the time, a lot of people had the classic Bitcoin argument of, how are you ever going to use this? It's so slow and so expensive. And so Lightning as the layer 2 scaling solution really solved for that. It was a way to have Bitcoin at a faster pace, at a cheaper pace, and even a little bit more privately than on the actual blockchain. And the purpose was to prove to people this is something that can be used. Bitcoin has a lot of functions, as you've learned from a lot of the slides that I've seen from this club. And one of those functions is payments. And so we really wanted to prove, like, stop that noise about how this thing is not scalable. It definitely is. And one of the ways that it can be even more scalable is through Lightning. So Strike started as Zap, the Lightning wallet. And it got so much traction that Jack, the CEO, thought, this could actually be an entire company. And so it moved to really becoming what is now Strike in 2019, 2020. And that's when they were like, okay, well, we can add buy Bitcoin, we can allow people to get paid in Bitcoin, and all of these novel use cases that allowed people to come more into the community and be able to use Bitcoin for more than just, buying and selling, which they were doing before, more of like that trading function. So it's been an interesting journey at Strike because by talking to customers, we've kind of decided, who to focus on, what to do. And it's pretty counterintuitive, actually. You kind of start as a company where the mission is better money. That's where we are now. And you think, well, if you're going to better money, if you're going to use Bitcoin as better money, that means you have to tell everybody about it and you have to get everyone on Bitcoin. The problem with that is that it's a very difficult message. You've probably tried it with your friends. If you try to orange pill someone, it's very hard at the very beginning. You kind of have to go through the education. You have to learn about the different aspects of Bitcoin. You have to understand what we mean when we say like Dogecoin is different from Bitcoin and so on. And that takes time. And so instead, very recently at Strike, we've focused on the Bitcoiner. How do we provide the best experience for Bitcoiners, whether that's buying and selling, that's using Bitcoin for payments, that's using better on-chain withdrawals, whatever it is. How do we provide a better experience for Bitcoiners? Because when more people get orange pilled through different functions, they're going to look for that Bitcoin app and hopefully they pick Strike. But of course, it's on the Lightning Network. We're interoperable. If you use Cash App, you can send to Strike. If you use Strike, you can send to Moon or Wallet of Satoshi or whatever. And so really, the more people that we can bring to Bitcoin, more people we can bring to Lightning, the whole network wins, which is very unique. It's a different angle of competition than at a typical company. So we're now available in 69 plus countries, which is very, very cool. It's properly global. And like I said, our mission is better money. So very happy to take more questions about Strike later. There's two things, though, that I wanted to focus on as part of Strike, which is first, and you can go to the next slide, is this aspect of buy Bitcoin. In the United States, this is taken a bit for granted, honestly, because we have so much competition. Even Coinbase, which now lists like who knows how many things, has been around for a while. And it's thanks to Coinbase, actually, that a lot of people are even Bitcoiners. And so in the United States, again, there's just a lot of competition. But when you look abroad, the picture is very, very different, which is kind of ironic to me, especially as a Colombian, because the people abroad typically need Bitcoin more. If anything, Americans take it for granted because our monetary system is okay. It's not great, clearly, which is why we appreciate Bitcoin, but it's okay. Whereas globally, you see levels of inflation that are quite nuts. Even for me as a Colombian, where it's not nearly as bad as Argentina or Venezuela or Nigeria, I feel it. I go home twice a year, and every time as an American, I have higher purchasing power than my family there, which is very messed up. And so globally, access to Bitcoin is very important. How do people abroad buy Bitcoin today? They either use P2P exchanges, which can be very sketchy and dangerous since you don't really know who's on the other side of your transaction. And a lot of the time, especially the poorer countries, these P2P transactions are happening in person. And so that's one major method. And then the other one is Binance. And when we do user research, what we hear from customers is they don't want to be using Binance. They use it because it's the option, but they don't want to because they've heard about the legal and regulatory problems they've had. They know about the other coins that they list and so on. And so Bitcoiners feel like there's kind of got to be a better way. And so for us, the buy Bitcoin functionality is a big hit. And the part that's a hit is doing it globally. It's letting people in their local regions on board to Strike using their local currency, using their local methods, and then being able to withdraw as well. So a big focus for us is buy Bitcoin globally. And then the next slide shows more of like the visionary aspect of Strike, which is really informing people that Bitcoin is way more than just an investment asset. It's way more than this buy sell piece. It actually enables a global monetary system that is harder, safer, better, faster, more accessible than anything that exists today. And so we have a feature called Send Globally that just does just this in a way that's kind of mind-blowing to people who aren't familiar with Bitcoin. So what do I mean by that? Today, if you want to send money abroad, there's really two different methods. You could go the old school Western Union way, which is completely fiat. And what that means is that it takes a long time for the money to get to the other side, and you have to pay a lot of fees. Sometimes they will fake the aspect of it being instant by essentially doing a loan on their side and charging you more to get the transaction to the other side faster. But for the most part, it's slow and pretty expensive. So that's one route. And then the other route is like the Web3 route, where you can use like some sort of token to zip across. And then like my grandma in Colombia has to receive like whatever coin that is. And that's just difficult to onboard people to. If you have two very techie friends who are in like Web3, maybe that works. But if I'm going to tell my grandma I'm going to send you $12 and you have to receive it in whatever coin, she's going to be like, I'm just not interested in that. And so Strike is kind of the hybrid of both. What we do is that to me, the sender, it's in my local currency, and to the receiver, it's in their local currency delivered to their local payment method. And the way that we make it instant and very, very cheap is by using Bitcoin in between. So my dollars convert into Bitcoin, which we then zip across to wherever you want it to be sent. And on the other side, they convert back to the local currency and get deposited into the respective bank account. And so again, it's instant, it's really low cost, and it kind of blows people's minds because they didn't even have to interact with Bitcoin in the process. This to us is something that's a lot more future facing. Again, it takes people to even be interested in Bitcoin to try something out that's not the typical Western Union route that they've been familiar with for the last, I don't even know how many decades. But it's something that we want to keep investing in because we know the day will come. And again, we want to be there when people are ready. And then two more things I wanted to talk about Strike before going into Q&A. Next slide is the developers aspect of it. Again, this is an open community. Strike started as an open source wallet. That's the Zap wallet. And so we very much benefit from people interacting on the network. One node is a lonely node is what our CEO says, and it's true. So the more people who are in Bitcoin, the more people who are in Lightning, everyone benefits. So we have our API docs that are public. You can check them out at docs.strike.me. And we enable you to do all sorts of crazy things. You can use our API to trigger like a 10-cent Bitcoin buy whenever the Cornell Bitcoin Club tweets, for example. You can do whatever cool sorts of things that you want. So I just wanted to put that out there as a reference in case you want to check it out and build some cool apps on top. And then the very last thing I wanted to talk about for Strike is this concept of education. A lot of the time when we do user research, the people are fully orange pills, they're Bitcoin maxis, and they're like, I love Strike, but like, how do I convince my best friend to use Strike? And usually it's just about education. It's informing people. It's teaching them what the Lightning Network even is, what an on-chain withdrawal is, like, and so on. And so this year we've devoted a lot of time to learn. So it's strike.me/learn. And we publish a lot of articles for these different concepts in ways that are very easy to understand. They also have all of the Strike branded illustrations and whatnot to make them more fun. But the idea is these are articles that you'd be able to send to anyone if you want them to understand a little bit more. There's articles about the halving, there's articles about UTXOs and so on. And so again, the idea is you educate people, they become more familiar, they become very interested, they go down the rabbit hole, and suddenly they're part of this club learning more about Bitcoin. So that is a quick ramble of what Stripe is. Cool. So now that we've gotten through intros, now that we've gotten through Strike, I definitely wanted it to be like time for a Q&A. So again, we can make it most beneficial for both parties. So yeah,
Awesome.
that's it
No,
for me.
thank you so much. That was just incredible, your presentation. And also on your note about, how do we use Bitcoin without people even really knowing we're using Bitcoin? I put Jack's like IMF presentation with the trail mix in the slides for later. So we'll have the whole visuals of that.
Incredible.
I have some questions, but do you all have any questions first that you're curious to ask Manuela about? I can get us started with some questions too. But I was curious, can you go back to when you're talking, and maybe I'll just, if it's okay, I'll stop the share of the slides. Is that okay? Uh,
Absolutely.
Perfect. So when you were, speaking on you have grown products from 0 to 25 million, what does that look like? What are some of the learnings from that?
What that looks like is very, very scary because that kind of product market fit is very rare, honestly. There's not a lot of products that get that much traction that quickly. And I've now been at very different startups where you see different levels of that traction. So one of my internships was at a company called Whisper, and that was way more on the like heavy consumer side. It was back when anonymous social media was like the coolest thing ever. So there was Whisper, there was Secret, there was Yik Yak. It was like all of these different things. And scale in that world looks very different than scale when you're dealing with people's money. Scale in social posts, it's like, oh, the picture got 15 likes instead of 16 likes and you had a bug. It's probably okay. Scale on Robinhood when you show a zero balance or a negative $700,000 balance, really scary. And it's people's lives. It's money at the end of the day. And so, yeah, if I were to use one word to describe what that was like, it would be scary. There's just a lot of responsibility involved, but also it's deeply exciting. I think the very cool thing about working at a startup and then working at a startup that finds that product market fit is knowing that every meeting that you have, every decision that you make impacts that many people. And again, it's that responsibility that comes with it. And so for us, it was really learning about what worked, what didn't, how to do scaled rollouts, things like that. But yeah, it's definitely, it was definitely challenging. The other thing I'll say to my point earlier about startups that hire new grads or hire interns is at Robinhood, there was a big emphasis in giving a lot of responsibility to engineers who are relatively new to the scene. And that was great for us in the early days because we shipped so fast. We were able to get so many products to market, which was essential to what Robinhood was doing. But it also meant that when we did hit that deep scale, it was tough because a lot of new grad engineers haven't seen that level of scale and don't know how to predict. And so at Robinhood, I think we even solved that problem a little late. And only later in the game did we hire more senior people who had seen that crazy scale and could anticipate it. And so there were definitely some moments like GameStop where it was like, if we could have done this again, maybe it would have been a little more strategic. But that's part of it. They survived, they're on the other side and thriving. So yeah, it was scary but fun.
Yes. And maybe on that note, since you were given so much responsibility early on, how has that helped you now with, you said, all the different teams that you manage, like marketing, all different areas?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a thing that I've learned mostly from my experience at Robinhood that is not very easy to do in the moment. And that's that usually you get hired for a job and you do that job. But the better way to grow and advance is actually to do your job and pay a lot of attention to what the other functions are doing. So if you're an engineer, it's like really paying attention to how the business works, how the business makes money, which means becoming familiar with finance, becoming familiar with data, becoming familiar with marketing. If you're in design, it's understanding how engineering works, it's understanding how product makes decisions and so on. And then for product, it's kind of a lucky spot where you almost have to learn about the different functions. But the more time that I spent, it made me a better product person. And so the reason why at Robinhood I was given so much responsibility is because even earlier in my 20s at the B2B company, I was talking to executives at different companies. I was pitching sometimes on behalf or with the sales team. I was working with huge teams of engineers because we were just some like few PMs. And so I had so much exposure that usually you don't get at a big company until much later in your career. And then at Robinhood, it was the same thing. I then was given product managers to manage, which made my transition into VP at Strike so much easier because I had already known and learned what management was like. And so that exposure to other jobs at the company just grows your sense of how the business works, how the product works, which then makes you much more valuable as an employee. Because now you know more than just product, you know about support, you know about finance, you know about accounting and so on. So yeah.
Yes. So, okay, so maybe you're going to touch on some of what you just said in this next question, but what skills should students develop today? Like if, just in their careers in general to be successful, are there a couple skills or mindset that you look back on, you're like, oh, that was really helpful. I did that, or someone told me about?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so three come to mind, but of course there's a million more. Number one is communication, which
Mhm.
is so cliche, I feel like, but it's so important, especially now that a lot of the companies are remote. You have people all over the world. Strike, for example, doesn't have an office. Even if I wanted to go to the office tomorrow, I can't. There is no such thing. And so you really have to nail communication. And I think the least intuitive part about communication is how much you have to tell people before they ask. The best communicators always make you feel like you're in the loop because they did the work to bring you in rather than you feeling you had to ask. Because the moment that someone feels like they have to ask, that means you're already behind. And so communication is just so, so, so critical. The second one is confidence. You definitely don't become someone with a ton of scope and responsibilities if you're kind of like, oh, I could do it, or like, I think I'll be good at it. Just gotta pretend. The whole like fake it till you become it, I sincerely believe in. You just have to have that confidence because if you're confident in yourself, other people are going to be confident in you. And that definitely has a line where it can go into like cockiness, and that's not what you want. It's just confidence that you know what you're doing, and if you don't, you'll very quickly learn. And the more you kind of mess up, the sooner that you learn those lessons and become even better. So confidence is really key, no matter the age, no matter the role. And then the third one is prioritization. A lot of people have ideas. A lot of people can tell you like, oh, this would be cool, this would be cool, this would be cool. But a real strategy and a real like positive output comes from being able to prioritize well, which comes with telling people, not now, maybe later. This is why this other thing is more important. But prioritization in any job will make you far, far better.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. And I guess maybe my last question, looking forward, you gave the API, which is so kind to share and that you all share that. What are some, functionality to Lightning or I don't know, different ideas or what, if you're in college, like what should you be focused on? What should you be thinking about?
Yeah. Um, it's kind of, I found it hard to do while I was in Ithaca, but
Yeah.
these days, there's many online methods to do it. But I think user research is so powerful. We base a lot of our roadmap, of course, like on our own data, our own understanding, our own intuition, but also a lot of what customers have to say. As I mentioned earlier, we did this counterintuitive thing where rather than trying to attract everyone, we really focused on the Bitcoiner. And that came from doing a personas exercise and trying to understand like who are the different profiles of people who use Strike and who should we focus on to be the most successful in the short term. And it kind of follows the strategy that a Facebook took back in the day. Rather than opening up to everyone, they opened up to first a couple of college campuses, then a greater base, and then everybody. And what that allowed them to do is focus and like really nail a product. Because if you really nail it for an audience and that audience is asking you for more, that audience is bound to grow. And so that's the same strategy that we've taken. So I think if you're in college, what should you be thinking about? Learn. Like, what are the problems out there? What are people talking about? What is not solved? These days, AI is like the hot thing, but what is the problem that is trying to be solved by AI? What are the problems that are being solved by Bitcoin? And then once you are in Bitcoin, what are the problems that still exist? And so for us, when we think about what we're working on, it's the global solution. You can't just say, all right, debit cards for global, done. Now people globally can onboard. No, because then you talk to a user in Colombia and they're like, I've never used a debit card. I still use cash. So it's really meeting people where they are, figuring out what the problems are, and then solving them.
Perfect. Yes. Well, does anyone else have any questions? You'd think, or maybe it, I don't know. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for being here today, and I guess my question was, I know you had mentioned that you wanted to start a company before joining Strike, but I was wondering, did you have like a specific idea in mind, or did you just, sort of have an entrepreneurial spirit and you were gonna figure out what you wanted to do?
I did. I had an idea, though the journey to getting an idea that I was excited enough about was very interesting. On the side of being a product manager and working at these startups, I am an investor. So I angel invest, but also I invest as a scout on behalf of a big investment firm. And when I was talking to one of the partners there, I was like, hey, I really want to be a founder, but I don't think my idea is good enough. And they were like, it doesn't matter. And that to me was very weird because I'm the type of person who wants to wake up 5 years from now and still be excited about the thing that I dedicated my life to. And they were like, no, 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 that's not the right way to think about it. You have to be excited now and you'll keep chipping away at the problem so that you will be excited in 5 years. And that kind of mindset shift helped me a lot because I was kind of blocking myself from exploring ideas because I would say, can't be excited about that one in 5 years. I can't be excited about that one, when really that wasn't it. So to answer your question though, I did have an idea. I had a friend who is a like deep content creator come over my house, and she was explaining to me how she got screwed on taxes the year before because she went from being a paycheck to paycheck person to being a content creator who was making 7 figures. And she was like, I owe so much to the government, had no idea how to do taxes. All this stuff is so complicated. And I had this idea of, wow, like one of the divisions that I owned at Robinhood was taxes. And the customer who was using Robinhood for the first, usually for a lot of them, it was the first time that they were filing taxes for investment. So I had seen a lot of these problems. And so immediately I thought, TurboTax for creators. And then eventually again, like when I met Jack, it was just obvious to me that sure, I could do this idea. Sure, we could build an incredible company that would honestly probably just get acquired by TurboTax in 5 years. But it was a very narrow vision and mission compared to what Strike was doing, where when are you going to solve global money? Probably never. And so really like every day I can be excited about it. So the reason why I didn't do it is just what we were doing at Strike was far more powerful than TurboTax for creators.
That's a great story. Okay, well, thank you so much, Manuela, for coming and for your presentation and all the advice that you shared.
Awesome. I have 2 more slides, one for the group.
Sorry.
No problem. So the first one is, how can I help? So I'm always looking to help students, especially Cornell students, learn more about product, learn more about design, content, UX, that whole product umbrella. So if at any point you're looking for advice or jobs, I can do my best to kind of connect you. So just give me a shout on Twitter. I'm Rios9312, which is such a stupid handle, but it was my Neopets handle, like when I was in 2nd grade, and that just stuck for the rest of my life. Or LinkedIn. So yeah, just give me a shout on those. And then the last slide is, how can you help just keep this passion and enthusiasm about Bitcoin alive? You fix the money and fix the world. And if you have any feedback about Strike, that's also a way that you can help. My line is always open. So if you have any feedback, any product ideas, anything at all, I'd love to hear it.
Thanks. Thank you so much. This is great. And we'll share the slides and everything so everyone will have your info.
Nice. Awesome.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you, Manuela. And I'm gonna now show everyone the video of Jack with the analogy and such.
Okay, perfect. It's 3:14 my time, so we're ending at 3:14 on 3:14, which I absolutely love.
Yes, you put in Pi Day. Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you just again so much and look forward to staying in touch and maybe having you back on campus someday.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the week and enjoy Pi Day.
Bye, Manuela.
Bye.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I'm going to switch over to just a couple slides. Let's see. So some really big news happened today in Bitcoin world. Has anyone heard of like Craig Wright or this big case talking about this guy who's claiming to be Satoshi? Let me actually I'm going to stop. Let's see, just so this is all big. Okay, I'm gonna stop this one too. What? Yes. Okay, so yeah, they've been at so okay, in like 2016, I think was the first time he claimed like I'm Satoshi. But then so this was about 5 years ago, I think the first like legal notice went out starting this whole lawsuit, and there's been many lawsuits. But yes, today the trial, like, or the big trial, there's still I think Not, who's right over here, he still has a couple, but yeah, the big one is now over, and so they say like, yes, he is not the author of the Bitcoin white paper, not the person who adopted or operated under Satoshi Nakamoto, not the person who created the Bitcoin system, not the author of the initial versions of the Bitcoin software. So yes, this is like very, very big news that happened today. So very fitting that we had our meeting today. And I just put up that. So it was COPA, which is Crypto Open Patent Alliance, which this is why Jack Dorsey is over here, one of like the main kind of board members, founders of that. And so anyways, that's like very, very big news. But what context did you just see it in the news or just Twitter? You just saw it. Yeah, so that's, good news to share. Yeah, I need to be better. I need to look more closely. I think it was saying, it was listing out like the different like prison sentences. I should know that answer. And I briefly saw that, but I will look more closely. Yeah, I mean, no one in the community like believed him. Yeah,
Regardless.
yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah. Um, and okay, so what is Lightning? So remember, like, I think it was like the very first lesson that I put together, like presented the idea of the blockchain trilemma and how kind of every blockchain, although we have our club challenge of calling it the Bitcoin time chain, not blockchain, you can only pick 2 out of the 3. So Bitcoin is very secure and very decentralized, but it's not that scalable. Like it can process 7 transactions per second, which if you want to have like the global money, that is not going to work. So Lightning, if you think about like building a building, it's kind of like it's layer 2. So like right now, like we're on like the ground floor. So I put a picture of Gates. Like you want the strong, like look at Gates, like it is just cement, like the strongest foundation that you can have so that the structure you're building will last for forever. And then on layer 2, you can address for that third piece, scalability. So if you want like the strongest Gates-like foundation, you need to optimize for security and decentralization. And then layer 2, you can address the scalability issue, which is what Lightning does. And so I just put a website. It's like a great spot for just different Lightning resources, but I want to show you 2 videos and it's perfect. We have like 10 minutes left. So this is just like a 5-minute video on what Lightning is, and then I'm going to show you a clip of a longer video. And I'm sorry the sound is a little odd. I'm not sure why it's not coming through the speakers, but
people believe that
now
Bitcoin
it
is
is.
the future of our financial system, but there is a big issue standing in the way of this goal, and that is scalability. Let me give an example. The payment provider Visa processes on average around 4,000 transactions per second and can scale up to a maximum of 65,000. Bitcoin, on the other hand, can handle up to 7 transactions per second with the current block size of 1 megabyte. Not tens of thousands, but just 7. Clearly, the main blockchain isn't very scalable, but it doesn't have to be. The community has come up with a new technique called the Lightning Network to solve the scalability issues. The key idea is that small and everyday transactions don't have to be stored on the main blockchain. This avoids the 7 transactions per second limit and is also called the off-chain approach. So how does it work? Well, let's take a look at an example. Let's say that every morning, Bob buys a cup of coffee on his way to work. Creating a transaction on the blockchain for a simple coffee is really overkill. He might end up paying more fees than the actual price of his coffee. However, with the Lightning Network, Bob can set up a payment channel with the coffee shop. To do that, both the coffee shop and Bob deposit a certain amount of Bitcoin in what is called a multi-signature address. Let's assume that Bob deposits 0.05 Bitcoin and that the coffee shop deposits nothing because they don't offer refunds. This multi-signature address is basically like a safe that can only be opened when both parties agree. When we open the payment channel, we also make a balance sheet that says how the funds in the address should be distributed. So right now it says that Bob will get 0.05 Bitcoin and that the coffee shop will get 0 Bitcoin, the same as they deposited. Opening the payment channel happens on the main blockchain so that there is full transparency. The coffee shop owner can see that Bob has deposited 0.05 Bitcoin, and he can rest assured that he will get his money once the channel closes. Now that the channel is open, Bob can order his morning coffee. Let's say that a coffee costs 0.001 Bitcoin. To pay for it, Bob simply changes the balance sheet. He subtracts the cost of a coffee from his balance and adds it to the coffee shop's balance. So now it says that Bob will get 0.045 Bitcoin and that the coffee shop gets 0.005 Bitcoin. Bob and the coffee shop now sign the updated balance sheet with their private keys. They then each keep a copy of it, but they don't do anything else with it. Bob can keep ordering coffee for as long as he has balance in the payment channel. Both of them can make hundreds of thousands of transactions between them. There's really no limit because this happens away from the main blockchain. But all good stories come to an end. The payment channel can be closed at any time by either Bob or the coffee shop. All they have to do is take the latest balance sheet, which was signed by both parties, and broadcast it to the Bitcoin network. Miners will then validate the signatures on the balance sheet and, if everything checks out, release the funds according to the balance sheet. This will create a single transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. So the Lightning Network can significantly reduce the load on the main blockchain. It only requires 2 transactions on the blockchain, one to open the payment channel and another one to close it. It's also very safe. The system ensures that only the latest signed balance sheet can be used to unlock the money. And because both parties have a signed copy of the balance sheet, they can release the funds at any time, even if the other one doesn't want to cooperate anymore. So for example, Bob cannot hold the money hostage that belongs to the coffee shop, and vice versa. But it doesn't end there. You don't need to open a direct payment channel with everyone you want to send Bitcoins to. You can simply use the network to pass your coins around. Here's Alice. She's a friend of Bob. They have exchanged money on the Lightning Network before, so they have an active payment channel. Now let's say that Alice wants to buy a coffee. Instead of opening a direct channel to the coffee shop, she can transfer the money to Bob, who will then transfer it to the coffee shop. So there's no need to create a payment channel with everyone. In the Lightning Network, your payment tries to find a route from person A to person B, and it tries to do this with the least amount of intermediates and the least amount of fees. This further reduces the strain on the blockchain, but it requires the intermediates to have enough money in their payment channels. So now you know what the Lightning Network is and how it works. But when will it actually go live? Well, right now there is a proof of concept implementation.
This is an old video. But anyways, we're gonna have more discussions on Lightning, but you don't need to take too much away from this, but I'm gonna show you what this is. Oh, sorry. In application. So this is the CEO of the company that Manuela is at, Strike. And fun fact, so Ezra Cornell, like a large chunk of like the money of his money, like pre-Cornell, so then come help build this, was because I think he was like the largest shareholder, like one of the founders of Western Union. At the time, it was Western Union Telegraph Company, I think was the full name. Now, like today, it's just referred to as Western Union, but kind of like a payment rail of how do you get money from like one country to another. And as Manuela was saying, it's very slow, very expensive. There's a lot of fees. And so that's why he kind of references this. This is a presentation that Jack did to the IMF. But in it, I recommend the whole thing, but there's just a good analogy with trail mix that I will play and show you what Strike does.
Here are your global payments. And so I'm going to tell a story. This is a true story, by the way. It was about a month ago. I was invited to the home of an executive at one of the largest asset managers in the world. They manage trillions of dollars worth of assets. And word on the street is there's some 27-year-old running around the Bay Area claiming that he was going to disrupt cross-border payments with Bitcoin. And I was tasked to explain it to him. And so I get to his home, and I was having a tough time really, talking about the Lightning Network, peer-to-peer and decentralization. And he had tortilla chips and trail mix on the table. I looked him in the eye, I said, you gotta bear with me for a second. This may be weird, but I'm just gonna visualize this for you. And I poured the tortilla chips and the trail mix out. It's a true story. True story. And I put a tortilla chip on the left. I said, here's a user in El Salvador, okay? And this is a user that wants to send a cross-border payment. And I put a tortilla chip on the far right of his dining room table. Said, here's a tortilla chip in El Salvador that wants to receive a payment, okay? And I put a bunch of tortilla chips all in the middle, okay? And then I put a raisin on the US tortilla chip. I said, that's representative of $1. And so the US tortilla chip wants to send this raisin to the El Salvador tortilla chip. We got all these tortilla chips in the middle. These are the required intermediaries to facilitate this money moving all the way from one closed loop regional system in the United States to El Salvador, okay? And all these intermediaries in the middle, they have all these raisins on them, all these sunken costs. They got to pay all the rent for all the brick and mortar locations all over the world. They got to pay the SWIFT fees, the banking fees. They have to custody their own raisins so that in the event that you wanted to get a raisin in El Salvador, they had to front the credit to the next correspondent bank, and there's settlement delays, and there's cost of managing all their raisins, right? And it's a real big mess to get all I want. I'm just a US tortilla chip. I mean no harm. I just wanted to get my raisins to the other side of the world, right? And so that's what it is today. Okay? That's SWIFT plus correspondent banking, Western Union and TransferWise and all these, right? And so then what I did is I took, same thing, I said, okay, we'll leave that up there. I took a new US tortilla chip down below and an El Salvadorian tortilla chip to the right. And I said, you know what's miraculous is that if I take a peanut from the trail mix, I can swing this peanut between the US and El Salvador instantly and at no cost. The peanut is irreversible, it is cash final, it lives free of intermediaries, it is open, it is global, and the peanut is valued everywhere in the world. Okay. The problem though, is that everyone said that they're allergic to peanuts. That was my joke to the asset manager. Is that no one cared that I could swing peanuts between these tortilla chips because everyone was allergic to peanuts. And so then what I did for the gentleman is I put a raisin on each, the US tortilla chip and the El Salvador one. And I said, listen, don't think of the peanut as something you have to touch. If you're allergic to it, you're allergic to it. We can still allow the tortilla chips to interface with the raisins, and we just use the peanut to get rid of all the muck in the middle up above. The peanut does the job of SWIFT plus correspondent banking plus Western Union plus TransferWise. You don't got to touch the peanut. You don't got to deal with Bitcoin's volatility or the tax consequences or the accounting headache or how technical it is. You don't got to be a cryptographer. We can use the peanut to escrow raisins between all the tortilla chips without having to deal with all the muck. Right?
So anyways, that is what she was referring to, and I think an easier to understand analogy. But okay, that's pretty much it. I put this in the email, but if you're interested in going to the Bitcoin Policy Institute Summit, this is right at the end of spring break, so it's April 9th. if it's like you will have to cover your transportation and such, but we can get you a ticket if you'd like to come. And then also the form about this kind of like field research for a project called Financial Freedom in the 21st Century. I'm going to close both of these tonight, but that's still open for a little bit. And that is it. So thanks, everybody.